In the days when Gil-galad yet held dominion over Lindon, and the light of Arundel's star shone bright upon the western shores, there came tidings most dire from the southern reaches of Middle-earth. Messengers rode hard through the passes of the misty mountains, their horses foam-flecked and near-spent, bearing word that struck fear into the hearts of all who heard it. Minas Tirith, the White City, Tower of Guard, and Jewel of Gondor, lay under siege. Yet this was no ordinary host that pressed against her gates. From the depths of Mordor there had come forth creatures of such malice and might that even the stout hearts of the Dunedain faltered before them. Black wings blotted out the sun, and the very stones of the Pelennor trembled beneath the tread of fell beasts. King Elessar stood upon the citadel's highest tower, his weathered face grave as he gazed eastward toward the gathering darkness. The Palantir of Minas Tirith lay covered in his chamber, for he dared not risk its use while such evil pressed near. Beside him stood Faramir, Prince of Ithilien, his fair features marked by concern. "My lord," spoke Faramir softly, "the outer defenses cannot hold much longer. These creatures, they are unlike any spawn of the enemy we have faced before. They bear weapons wrought in the fires of Mount Doom, yet their malice seems older, deeper than even Sauron's hatred." Elessar's hand rested upon the hilt of Anduril, the flame of the west, but even that hallowed blade seemed dim in the face of this new threat. "Send word to Rohan," he commanded. "Bid King Eomer ride with all speed, and dispatch riders to Lothlorien and Rivendell. If this evil is what I fear it to be, we shall have need of all the wisdom of the Eldar." As night fell over Minas Tirith, the enemy's drums began their dreadful rhythm, echoing off the walls like the heartbeat of some monstrous thing. In the deepest vaults of the White City, ancient scrolls spoke of a darkness that predated even Morgoth's corruption of the Maiar, a primordial shadow that had waited long ages for its time to rise. 3 days passed in restless vigil, and on the fourth dawn, the sky grew black as if night had returned. From the east came 9 shapes upon fell beasts, their wings beating with the sound of rushing wind, and their cries piercing the hearts of all who heard them. The Nazgul had returned to Middle-earth, yet they bore new forms and terrible purpose. Upon the walls of Minas Tirith, the guards watched in horror as the 9 descended toward the city. Their steeds were no longer the fell beasts of old, but creatures of living shadow and flame, with eyes like burning coals and breath that withered the very air. At their head rode one whose crown of iron was wreathed in darkness absolute, the Witch King of Angmar, yet changed beyond recognition. "The Dark Lord is destroyed!" cried a captain of the guard, his voice cracking with fear. "How do they live still?" But Gandalf the White, who had arrived in the night upon Shadowfax, stood calm amid the terror. His staff blazed with inner light as he spoke. Sauron was but their latest master, not their creator. These servants of the Shadow were bound to powers far older and more terrible than the Dark Lord of Mordor. Now that their bonds are broken, they serve a new master, or perhaps return to an old one. The lead Nazgul raised a blade that seemed to drink the very light from the air, and spoke in a voice like the grinding of tombstone. "Heir of Isildur, your kingdom's hour is at hand. Surrender the Seeing Stone, and your death shall be swift. Refuse, and watch as all you love is consumed in darkness everlasting." Elessar drew Anduril, its blade singing as it cleared the scabbard. "I am Aragorn, son of Arathorn, king of Gondor and Arnor. While I draw breath, no shadow shall claim this city or her people." The Witch King's laughter was like the sound of breaking glass. "Then let darkness be your shroud, last king of a dying line." The assault upon Minas Tirith began with a fury that shook the very foundations of the White City. Great engines of war, wrought in caverns deep beneath the mountains of shadow, hurled stones that blazed with unholy fire. Where they struck, the white stone blackened and cracked, and from the fissures seeped a darkness that seemed to have substance and malevolent will. Upon the Pelennor field, an army such as had not been seen since the last alliance spread like a tide of midnight. Orcs there were in countless thousands, but these were not the crude spawn of Saruman or even the fell legions of Mordor. These creatures bore themselves with discipline and cruel intelligence, their armor black as night, and wrought with runes that hurt the eyes to look upon. Among them strode beings of greater terror, Balrogs that had slumbered in the roots of mountains since the elder days, their whips of flame laying waste to all before them. Great wolves ran at their flanks, their eyes green fire, and their howls carrying madness to all who heard them. And overhead, the Nazgul circled on their dreadful mounts, their presence alone enough to drain hope from the hearts of defender. In the House of Healing, the wounded spoke in delirium of dreams that came to them in their pain, visions of a great tower of black stone that pierced the sky beyond seeing, and upon its summit, a figure wreathed in shadow and flame, whose very gaze could unmake the works of Eru himself. "The nameless fear," whispered the oldest among the lore masters, his face pale as parchment. "It is spoken of in texts so ancient that few can read them. A power that existed before the music of creation itself, bound by the valor in the void beyond. If it has found a way to stretch forth its hand into Middle-earth." But his words were cut short by a tremendous crash that shook the entire city. The great gate of Minas Tirith, wrought of mithril and steel and warded with the blessings of the Eldar, began to crack beneath the assault of the enemy's ram. In his desperation, Elisar at last uncovered the Palantir of Minas Tirith, though Gandalf counseled strongly against its use. "The Seeing Stones are perilous," warned the White Wizard, "and in times of great darkness they may show truth mixed with lies, or truth so terrible that it destroys the viewer." But the King of Gondor was resolute. "If I am to lead my people in their darkest hour, I must know what we face, whatever the cost." He placed his hands upon the crystal sphere, and immediately his face contorted in shock and horror at what he beheld. Visions flooded his mind, the foundations of the world cracking and bleeding darkness, great towers of shadow rising from the depths of the earth, and armies beyond counting marching forth from places that had no name. But most terrible of all was the sight of a figure seated upon a throne of starlight, turned to shadow, its face hidden beneath a crown of thorns wrought from the crystallized screams of the tormented. "I see," Elisar gasped, his voice barely a whisper. "I see the purpose behind this assault. They do not merely seek conquest. They seek the utter unmaking of all that is. The White City is but the first step in a plan to tear apart the very fabric of creation itself." The Palantir showed him more, secret passages beneath Minas Tirith that delved deeper than any architect had intended, reaching down to chambers that predated the founding of Gondor by centuries uncounted. And in those depths, something stirred that had waited long ages the stars to come right for its awakening. "We must evacuate the deepest level," Elisar commanded, though his strength seemed drained by what he had witnessed. "Seal every passage that leads downward, and set guards at every stair. What lies beneath is perhaps more dangerous than what assails us from without." As if summoned by his words, a tremor ran through the White City, and from far below came a sound like the breathing of some titanic thing that had never known the touch of sunlight. On the 5th day of the siege, when hope had nearly fled the hearts of all defenders, the sound of horns rang out across the Pelennor field. From the north came the Eord of Rohan, led by King Eomer himself, their spears gleaming in the pale light of dawn. 6,000 riders strong they were, the greatest muster of the Rohirrim since the days of Theoden King. But as they crested the hill and saw the host arrayed against them, even the stoutest hearts among the riders of the Mark felt the cold touch of despair. The enemy's numbers had swollen through the night, and now they covered the fields like a black sea. Creatures of nightmare prowled among the ranks, cave trolls the size of houses, dragons from the withered heath beyond the Sea of Rune, and things that had no names in any tongue of Middle-earth. "Forward!" cried Eomer, raising his sword high. "Death! Death! Death to the enemies of the light!" And the Rohirrim answered with a great cry that shook the very air, spurring their horses to the charge, with a courage born of desperation and love for all that was fair in the world. The clash was tremendous beyond description. The horses of Rohan struck the enemy line like a wave against stone, their riders' spears finding mark after mark in the press of battle. For a moment, it seemed that valor and skill might triumph over darkness and number. Eomer himself carved a path deep into the enemy ranks, his sword singing as it clove through armor and flesh. But the tide could not be turned by courage alone. The Balrogs strode into battle, their whips of flame scattering the horses and riders like leaves before a storm. The great wolves leaped and tore at the flanks of the charge, and overhead the Nazgûl stooped upon their fell beasts, sowing terror and confusion. When the sun set upon that field, barely half the Rohirrim lived to see another dawn, and they were driven back within the walls of Minas Tirith, their horses spent and their hearts heavy with loss. Yet their sacrifice had bought precious time, and in the White City, preparations continued for what all knew must be the final stand. In the hour of greatest need, when the gates of Minas Tirith had at last given way and fighting raged in the streets of the lower circle, there came unexpected aid. A company of elves rode hard from the Grey Haven, led by Círdan the shipwright himself, bearing weapons and lore from the Elder Days. With them came Elrond Half-Elven, master of Rivendell, his face grave with knowledge of what had come to pass. In his hands he bore ancient scrolls written in letters of silver, and upon his brow sat the ring Vilya, mightiest of the three. "The nameless fear stirs," he said without preamble, as he entered the citadel where Elessar held council. "We have delved deep in the archives of Gil-galad and found record of this evil. It is no servant of Morgoth, but something far older, a fragment of the discord that Melkor introduced into the music of creation itself." Gandalf nodded grimly. "I had suspected as much. The Nazgûl spoke truly when they claimed to serve a power greater than Sauron. This enemy seeks not merely dominion, but the unmaking of all that Eru brought forth." "Then we are beyond hope," said Faramir, his hand pressed to a wound taken in the day's fighting. "How can mortal strength stand against such cosmic malevolence?" "Yotin." But Elrond's eyes held a gleam of hope, though it was dim as starlight. "There is a way, though the price may be greater than any victory. The White Tree of Gondor is no mere symbol. It is descended from Telperion itself, and within its roots lies a power that even the nameless fear must respect. But to awaken that power would require a sacrifice beyond measure." The ancient elf opened one of the scrolls, revealing text in the Quenya tongue that seemed to shimmer and dance before the eyes. Here it is written that in the darkest hour, when shadow seeks to devour light eternal, the tree shall bloom with flowers of fire, and its roots shall drink deep of willing sacrifice to nourish the coming dawn. As he spoke these words, a tremendous crash shook the citadel. The enemy had broken through to the sixth circle, and their drums beat ever closer to the heart of the White City. In the court of the fountain, the White Tree of Gondor stood in its ancient majesty, its silver bark gleaming in the light of torches. Yet, as the battle raged around it, and darkness pressed ever closer, its leaves began to take on a strange luminescence, as if responding to the approaching crisis. Elessar knelt before the tree, his hands pressed against its roots, while Elrond chanted in the high tongue of the Eldar. The words were older than the kingdoms of men, older than the forging of the rings of power, reaching back to the very foundations of the world. "The tree awakens," whispered Gandalf, his staff beginning to blaze with answering light. "But the price, Elessar, do you understand what is asked of you?" The king of Gondor raised his head, and in his eyes was a light that had not been there before. The light of kings long dead, the wisdom of Númenor, and the courage that had faced the Dark Lord himself upon the slopes of Mount Doom. "I understand," he said simply. "The tree will bloom, but only if it is watered with the life of a true king. The blood of Isildur must return to the earth, that from that sacrifice might spring a power to drive back the void itself. Around them, the battle grew ever more desperate. The clash of arms echoed through the upper circles, and the cries of the wounded pierced the night. But here, in this sacred space, a different kind of battle was beginning. A struggle not of sword and spear, but of will and sacrifice against the primordial darkness. Faramir stepped forward, his face pale but resolute. "My lord, there must be another way. Gondor cannot lose her king. Gondor will have no kingdom to rule if this evil is not stopped," Elisar replied. "And perhaps this has always been my fate, to stand at the crossroads between light and darkness and choose the path of sacrifice that others might live." The white tree's leaves began to glow brighter, and from its branches came a sound like the music of the spheres themselves, beautiful beyond description, yet sad as the ending of all things. Even as hope kindled in the court of the fountain, the Witch King of Angmar pressed his assault with renewed fury. The Nine had broken through to the seventh circle, their fell beasts landing upon the white stone with claws that left gouges in the ancient masonry. "I smell the stench of elven magic," hissed the Witch King, his voice echoing strangely in the narrow streets. "They seek to kindle some flame against us, but it matters not. The nameless fear has looked upon this city through our eyes, and its doom is sealed." With him came creatures of living shadow, things that had no solid form, but could pass through stone as easily as air. They seeped through the walls and foundations of the White City, seeking the source of the growing light. Where they passed, flowers withered and water turned bitter, and even the brave hearts of Gondor's defenders felt the chill of despair. In the court of the fountain, the ceremony reached its climax. Elisar drew Andúril and pressed its point against his breast, while all around him, the guardians of Middle-earth watched in solemn silence. The white tree blazed now like a star fallen to earth, its light streaming upward to challenge the darkness that pressed down from above. "For Gondor," he whispered, and prepared to make the final sacrifice. But in that moment, young Bergil, son of Baragon, came running into the court, his face bright with wonder and fear. "My lords, in the deepest vaults, we have found something, a chamber sealed since the city's founding, and within it." His words were cut short, as one of the shadow creatures flowed into the court, its touch bringing frost to the very air. But as it approached the white tree, the blazing light struck it like a physical blow, and with a shriek that chilled the blood, it fled back into the darkness whence it came. "Speak, boy," commanded Elrond urgently. "What have you found?" "A tomb, my lord, but not of any king of Gondor. The inscription is in letters I cannot read, but there is one within who still draws breath, though he has lain there for age upon age." And when the battle began above, he stirred and spoke a single word, finally. He, in the deepest foundations of Minas Tirith, below chambers that had known the tread of kings for 3,000 years, lay a tomb that predated even the coming of the Númenórean to Middle-earth. Its stones were not of any quarry in Gondor, but black basalt shot through with veins of silver that seemed to move in the torchlight. Upon the sarcophagus lay a figure in armor that gleamed like starlight, untouched by the centuries that had passed. His face was fair but marked by a sorrow deeper than the seas, and upon his brow rested a circlet of mithril, worked with gems that held their own inner fire. "Gil-galad," breathed Elrond, his voice thick with emotions long thought buried. "But how? I saw him fall upon the slopes of Mount Doom." I held his hand as the light faded from his eyes. The figure upon the bier stirred at the sound of the Elvish name, and slowly his eyes opened. Eyes like deep pools that reflected stars not of this world. When he spoke, his voice was like the memory of music, beautiful, but infinitely sad. "Long have I waited in the halls between life and death," he said, sitting up with movements that seemed to cost him great effort. "The Valar granted me this reprieve, knowing that a day would come when the darkness before darkness would seek to unmake their work. I am not truly alive, old friend, but neither am I dead. I am the echo of a king, preserved for this hour." Around them, The very stones of the city trembled as the battle raged above. The sound of the Nazgul's cries filtered down even to these depths, and with them came the beating of vast wings and the clash of weapons beyond count. "The White Tree calls to you," Gil-galad continued, rising from his tomb with the grace of the Eldar. "It knows its time has come, but the sacrifice need not be that of mortal blood alone. I have waited 3,000 years to complete my purpose. Let an elf king's life kindle the flame that will burn away this shadow." In his hand appeared a sword that blazed with its own light. Eglos, the snow point, thought lost forever in the fires of Mount Doom, but here it stood whole and bright, as if the years between had been but a dream. "Together," he said, extending his hand to Elisar, "the last High King of the Eldar, and the last King of the Dunedain, together we shall light a beacon that will shine across all the circles of the world." In the court of the fountain, an alliance was renewed that had not been seen since the last alliance of elves and men. Gil-galad, returned from the halls of the dead, stood beside Elisar, while around them gathered the greatest heroes of the Third Age: Gandalf the White, Elrond half-elven, Éomer of Rohan, and faithful Faramir of Gondor. The White Tree blazed now with such radiance that it could be seen from the highest peaks of the misty mountains, its light streaming up to challenge the very stars. But with that light came a price. Both Gil-galad and Elisar grew pale as their life force fed the ancient power. "The nameless fear approaches," said Gandalf, his face grim as he peered into the darkness beyond the city walls. "It comes not in flesh, but as a presence that seeks to snuff out the light of creation itself. Even now, I can feel reality bending and twisting where its attention falls. Indeed, strange things were happening throughout Minas Tirith. Shadows moved against the direction of their light sources. Water flowed upward in defiance of nature's laws, and the very air seemed to thicken until each breath was an effort. Most disturbing of all, some of the defenders began to fade, becoming translucent, as if they were being erased from existence itself. "Hold fast to what you know to be true," commanded Elrond, his ring Vilya blazing upon his hand. "The nameless fear seeks to convince us that we are but dreams within dreams, that nothing is real save its eternal hunger. Remember your name, remember your loves, remember why you fight." The enemy's final assault began with a sound like reality itself tearing asunder. The Nazgul descended upon the citadel in a spiral of darkness, their fell beasts' wings blotting out even the light of the White Tree. Behind them came things that had no name, creatures of living void that made the eye refuse to see them clearly. But the greatest horror was yet to come. Over the walls of Minas Tirith rose something that was not precisely a shape, but rather the absence of shape, a presence so fundamentally wrong that it seemed to corrupt the very concepts of existence and meaning. "The Unnamed," whispered Gil-galad, and for the first time since his awakening, his voice held a note of fear. "I had hoped we would have more time." The battle that followed was unlike any in the annals of Middle-earth, for it was fought not merely with sword and spell, but with the very essence of existence itself. The nameless fear pressed down upon Minas Tirith like a weight beyond imagining, seeking to crush not only the defenders' bodies, but their souls, their memories, their very being. Against this cosmic horror, the forces of light made their final stand. The White Tree blazed like a second sun, its roots drinking deep of the life force offered by the Two Kings. Around it, the heroes of Middle-earth fought with desperate courage, each wielding powers drawn from the deepest wells of their being. Gandalf raised Glamdring high, and it blazed with the light of Valinor itself, cutting through the shadows that sought to engulf them. Elrond's ring, Vilya, shone like a star upon his hand, weaving barriers of pure thought against the encroaching madness. Éomer led the last of the Rohirrim in charge after charge, their horses' hooves striking sparks from stones that had begun to lose their solidity. But it was Gil-galad and Elisar who bore the greatest burden, pouring their life essence into the White Tree until its light began to push back the darkness. The ancient elf king's form grew ever more translucent, while Elisar's hair turned white as snow with the strain of channeling such power. "The roots!" cried Gil-galad suddenly, his voice barely audible above the cosmic tumult. "The tree's roots have found them, the foundations of the world itself. But I cannot sustain this much longer." Indeed, cracks were appearing in reality itself around the court of the fountain, showing glimpses of the void that lay beyond all creation. Through those cracks pressed tendrils of pure negation, seeking to unravel the bonds that held existence together. It was then that the great plot twist of this tale revealed itself, for from the deepest roots of the white tree came not light, but laughter, the laughter of Eru Iluvatar himself, who had foreseen this moment from the very beginning of the music of creation. As the laughter of Eru echoed through the court of the fountain, the true nature of the nameless fear was at last revealed. It was not some primordial evil from before creation, but rather a necessary part of the music itself, the discord that gave meaning to harmony, the darkness that defined the light. "Do you not see?" spoke a voice that was neither Gil-galad's nor Elisar's, but came from the white tree itself. "This battle was always meant to be. The nameless fear is not the enemy of creation, but its completion. Only by facing the possibility of absolute negation can existence truly affirm its worth." The Witch King of Angmar, who had pressed closest to the tree in his final assault, suddenly stopped and raised his sword. But instead of striking, he knelt, and his voice, when he spoke, was filled not with malice, but with profound understanding. "The music calls us home," he said, his form beginning to dissolve. "Light and dark, order and chaos, being and void, all are part of the greater song. We have played our part, and now the symphony moves to its next movement." One by one, the creatures of darkness began to fade, not destroyed, but transformed, returning to their proper place in the cosmic order. The Balrog's flames cooled to gentle warmth, the wolves' howls became songs of mourning for the fallen, and even the Nazgul found peace at last. Their long torment ended. Gil-galad, his purpose fulfilled, smiled one last time at his old friend Elrond. "Tell them," he whispered, as his form became light itself. "Tell them that the light endures, not because darkness is absent, but because both are needed for the song to be complete." With those words, the last High King of the Eldar passed into the west, his spirit finally at rest. Elisar, drained but alive, stood before the white tree as it blazed one final time before settling into a gentle, eternal glow. The city around them was changed, still beautiful, but touched now with a deeper understanding of its place in the greater pattern of creation. In the days that followed, as the dead were mourned and the city rebuilt, the people of Gondor would speak in wonder of the night when doom descended upon the White City, only to be transformed into the dawn of a new understanding. The white tree bore fruit that season for the first time in 1,000 years, fruit that glowed with inner light and granted wisdom to all who tasted of it. And in the deepest archives of Minas Tirith, the lore masters would write of the night when the music of creation played its greatest movement, teaching all who dwelt in Middle-earth that even in the darkest hour, the song endured, and all things, light and shadow, joy and sorrow, creation and entropy, are part of one eternal harmony that cannot be broken, only transformed. Thus ended the tale of doom descending on the White City, not with the triumph of light over darkness, but with the recognition that both are eternal partners in the dance of existence, forever weaving the tapestry of time until the end of all songs and the beginning of the song that is to come. Epilogue. The dawn of understanding. 7 years had passed since the night of the Great Darkness, as the chroniclers came to name it, and the White City stood more glorious than ever before. Yet those who looked upon Minas Tirith with eyes trained in the deeper lores could see that it was changed, transformed by the cosmic struggle that had played out within its walls. The white tree grew now with supernatural vigor, its branches reaching toward heights that seemed to pierce the very dome of the sky. Its leaves shimmered with an inner radiance that waxed and waned like the breathing of some great living thing. And at certain hours, particularly at dawn and dusk, when the veils between worlds grew thin, those who stood in its presence could hear the faint echo of the music of creation itself. King Elessar, though aged beyond his years by the great sacrifice, ruled with a wisdom that had become legendary throughout the realms of men. His hair turned silver white in that moment when he had fed his life force to the tree, now bore streaks of starlight that seemed to move of their own accord. When he spoke in council or judgment, his words carried a weight that went beyond mere royal authority. They resonated with the deeper harmonies of existence itself. The burden of understanding, he often said to Faramir as they walked in the court of the fountain, is heavier than any crown. To know that all things, even evil itself, serve the greater music. It changes how one sees every choice, every consequence. The Prince of Ithilien, now grown gray in service to both his king and the deeper mysteries they had witnessed, nodded gravely. The wound he had taken in the great battle had never fully healed, but it served as a constant reminder of the price of wisdom. Do you ever wonder, my lord, if we were truly heroes that night, or merely instruments in a song whose melody we could not comprehend? Elessar paused beneath the tree's spreading branches, where fruit hung like captured stars. Perhaps, he said softly, the greatest heroism lies not in understanding one's part in the music, but in playing it faithfully, even when its harmonies seem discordant to mortal ears. In the great library of Minas Tirith, Master Targon, eldest of the lore keepers, labored over a work that would become known as the Chronicle of the Last Alliance of Light and Shadow. His task was no simple one, for how could mortal words capture the moment when existence itself had hung in the balance? How could parchment and ink convey the cosmic laughter of Eru Ilúvatar echoing through the foundations of reality? The difficulty, he confided to his assistant, young Baron of the Third Company, is that our language was forged for describing the world of separate things. This tree, that stone, these men, those orcs. But what we witnessed was the revelation that all things are but facets of a single, incomprehensible jewel. How do we write of unity using words that divide? The old scholar gestured to the window, where beyond the white walls of the city, the Pelennor fields stretched green and fertile once more. But those with eyes to see could perceive that the very grass grew in pattern that echoed the cosmic geometry, glimpsed terrible and wonderful night. Even the flowers bloomed in colors that had no names in any earthly tongue, hues that existed only in the spaces between the notes of the great song. Perhaps, suggested Baron, his young face bright with the earnestness of scholarship, we should not try to explain what happened, but rather to preserve the wonder of it. Let future generations feel the awe, even if they cannot grasp the meaning. Master Targon smiled, remembering his own youth, and the world had seemed full of mystery, waiting to be solved, rather than revealed to be ever deepening. Wisdom beyond your years, young one. The greatest truths are not those that can be comprehended, but those that can transform the comprehender. In Rohan, King Éomer sat his throne with a gravity that had not been there before the great ride to Minas Tirith. The loss of so many of his riders weighed heavily upon him, yet he had come to understand that their sacrifice had been part of something far greater than any earthly battle. The Rohirrim who had survived that charge spoke in hushed tones of how, in the moment of greatest peril, they had heard the neighing of horses that were more than horses, and seen riders in silver mail who galloped alongside them, the spirits of all who had ever ridden in the service of light. We are part of something eternal, Éomer would say to his marshals when they gathered in council. Every charge we make, every lance we level, every song we sing around the fire, all of it echoes in halls beyond the circles of the world. Let no man think his deeds too small to matter, for even the flutter of a sparrow's wing can change the course of the wind. The mark had changed in other ways as well. The horses bred in the fields of Rohan now possessed an otherworldly quality, their eyes holding depths of understanding that spoke of bloodlines touched by the cosmic forces unleashed in that great conflict. Children born since the night of the Great Darkness often displayed gifts that their parents could not name. The ability to hear the music in the wind, to see the patterns that connected all living things, to speak words that brought comfort to wounded spirits, even when the speakers themselves did not understand their meaning. In distant Lothlorien, Lady Galadriel stood by the mirror that had shown her so much over the long centuries, but now she found its waters clouded with visions too vast for even her keen sight to fully encompass. The light of Nenya upon her hand had changed, taking on hues that seemed to shift between dimensions, reflecting not just the visible spectrum, but the very frequencies of thought and emotion. The time of the elves in Middle-earth draws to a close, she said to Celeborn as they walked among the golden Malorn trees, but perhaps that was always the plan. We were the guardians of the ancient wisdom, the keepers of the memory of the music's first theme. Now that all the world has heard those themes renewed, our guardianship passes to others. Yet even as she spoke of departure, Galadriel knew that the passing of the elves would not be an ending, but a transformation. The wisdom they had preserved would live on in the stones of Minas Tirith, in the growing patterns of the Pelennor, in the changed bloodlines of the Rohirrim, and in the dreams of children yet unborn, who would carry forward the memory of the night when light and shadow danced together in perfect, terrible harmony. In the Grey Haven, Círdan the shipwright worked with renewed purpose on vessels unlike any that had ever sailed the sundering seas. These ships bore sails woven from starlight and timber grown from seeds of the white tree itself. They were designed not merely to carry passengers across the waters, but to navigate the deeper currents that flowed between the worlds. The harbors of Valinor are not the only destination now, he explained to the younger shipwrights who marveled at his design. The music has opened new channels, new possibilities for voyage and return. These ships will carry not just those ready to depart Middle-earth, but also those who must journey to the spaces between the notes, where the deeper harmonies can be studied and understood. As the 7th anniversary of the Great Darkness approached, all the peoples of Middle-earth felt a stirring in their hearts, a sense that some great culmination was at hand. In Minas Tirith, the white tree began to pulse with increasing intensity, its light visible now even in the full brightness of noon. The fruit that hung from its branches grew heavy and sweet, and those who tasted of it found their dreams filled with visions of vast libraries where the thoughts of stars were catalogued, and great halls where the music of the spheres played eternally. King Elessar, feeling the approach of something momentous, called for a great gathering, not just of the nobles and warriors of Gondor, but of all who had been touched by the events of that transformative night. From Rohan came Éomer with a company of his finest riders. From the north came representatives of the Dúnedain, bearing word of wonder in the rebuilt kingdom of Arnor. From the distant Blue Mountains came dwarves, who spoke of hearing new songs in the deep places of the earth, melodies that taught them to forge metals that sang with their own voices. Most surprising of all, from the uttermost south came emissaries of peoples who had never before acknowledged the authority of Gondor, dark-skinned warriors who spoke of seeing stars fall upward in the night of the Great Darkness, and of how their shamans now dreamed dreams that connected them to the greater pattern, of which their ancient enemies had somehow always been part. On the night of the 7th anniversary, as all these representatives gathered in the court of the fountain, the white tree began to sing. It was not a sound that could be heard with earthly ears, but rather a vibration that resonated in the very bones and souls of all who were present. The song spoke of cycles within cycle, of patterns repeating across scales from the infinitesimal to the cosmic, of how every ending was a new beginning, and every discord eventually resolved into deeper harmony. As the tree sang, its light began to spread outward in visible waves, washing over the assembled multitude and beyond, flowing like a luminous tide across the city, the field, the mountains, and the seas. Wherever that light touched, the hidden connections between all things became momentarily visible. Threads of starlight, linking every living creature to every other, showing how the breath of a child in Minas Tirith could influence the blooming of flowers in the distant shores of Harad, how the song of a bird in Rohan could echo in the deepest caverns beneath the lonely mountain. In that moment of cosmic revelation, all present understood what Gil-galad and Elessar had glimpsed in their moment of supreme sacrifice, that there was no real separation between light and shadow, between order and chaos, between self and other. All were aspects of a single, vast, incomprehensible intelligence that thought with the thoughts of stars and dreamed with the dreams of every living thing. When the vision faded and ordinary sight returned, the assembled multitude found that they had been changed, not in any visible way, but in their understanding of their place in the great pattern. Kings and servants, warriors and scholars, elves and men and dwarves, all now carried within themselves the knowledge that every choice they made, every word they spoke, every deed they performed would ripple outward through the cosmic web, influencing possibilities they could never imagine, across distances they could never traverse. King Elessar, his hair now fully silver, but his eyes bright with the light of deep understanding, stood before the white tree and spoke the words that would be remembered as the foundation of the Fourth Age. We are not separate notes in the music of creation, but harmonics of a single eternal song. Let us play our parts with joy and reverence, knowing that even the mistakes we make will be woven into melodies of surpassing beauty by the composer who hears not just what is, but what could be, what should be, and what, in the fullness of time, shall be. Thus began the Age of Understanding, when the peoples of Middle-earth lived in conscious awareness of their participation in the cosmic symphony. It was not an age without sorrow or conflict, for the music required both consonance and dissonance to achieve its full beauty. But it was an age when every tear shed was understood to water the gardens of eternity, when every laugh echoed in the halls of the timeless, and when every act of courage or kindness sent ripples of light across the dark waters of possibility, illuminating paths to future bright beyond imagining. And the white tree continued to grow, its roots now reaching not just deep into the earth, but into the very foundations of being itself, while its branches stretched ever upward toward the stars, connecting the realm of Middle-earth to the greater realms beyond, ensuring that the song would continue until the end of all ending and the beginning of the song that is to come.